Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2019 Advanced. In this section, we're going to take a look at Get and Transform. Now, to some extent, Get and Transform is a progression from the earlier facilities to get data from the web. The facilities from Excel 2010 to 2013 became known as Power Query, and now Get and Transform has really superseded Power Query in Excel 2016 and 2019. But it's not just about getting data from the web. Get and Transform enables you to get data from many different sources, including many of the ones we've seen so far, such as getting data from Access or a CSV file, and transforming the data to suit your particular requirements. So that's an overview of Get and Transform. And there are two subsequent steps, which are combine, when you create a data model and you can combine multiple data sources. So you can maybe get some data from the web, such as the current exchange rate, maybe get some data from an Access database, such as the cost of a trip, and then combine them both to provide some additional insights into the underlying data. And there is a fourth step in this process, which is generally described as share, where you can share the data or perhaps use it in reports. Now, as I say, in this section, I'm going to concentrate on Get and Transform. And following on from the preceding section, what I'm going to do is get some web data and transform it to make it a little more suitable to my requirements. Now, in the next section, I'm going to set you exercise 5, and in exercise 5, I'm going to ask you to get and transform some specific data related to the weather. In this particular section, I'm going to get and transform some sports data, and just to make it a little more interesting for you, if you're going to work along with me, you could try your local sports data. For example, this is a section of the NFL table, and I'm going to process some English Premier League results. But if you're interested in neither the British Premier League or the NFL, then try some other tabular data from somewhere on the web, and you'll probably find it will present some of the challenges I'm going to face in this section, and probably a few different challenges as well. But if you don't particularly want to use your own data, you can just follow along with the English Premier League data that I'm going to get and transform. So we're now looking at the Premier League table as it is today on the BBC website. The BBC website is not known for moving things around too much, so I hope that by the time you come to follow this course, the Premier League table will still be where it is, although of course the position of the teams and the statistics will have changed. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up a regular feed from this table into Excel. Now, fundamentally, we're doing a similar thing to what we did in the preceding section. So having identified the page that contains the data that I want, I'm now going to grab the URL. So I'm just going to select it and copy it to the clipboard, Control-C. I'm now going to switch back to a new Excel workbook. And I've already called this workbook getandtransform.xlsx. I'm going to go to the Data tab and to the Get and Transform Data group. I'm going to click Get Data, go all the way down to From Other Sources and select From Web. Now, when I click on From Web, it comes up with a dialog, and it's in that dialog that I paste or type the URL containing the data. So I'm just going to do Control-V to paste and click on OK. Now, I'm going to warn you that when I do this, if Excel successfully finds the page, it will do an analysis on that page, and this can sometimes take a little bit of time. This isn't only related to the speed of your internet connection. Excel sometimes has a lot of processing to do to work its way through the page. But we seem to be good here. So when it's finished analyzing the page, this Navigator dialog box shows you what it's found, and in this particular case, underneath the URL, you just have document, which is some basic document information about the page. And then it lists another entity, table 0. And you can see here in the preview pane on the right-hand side, we have the English Premier League table listed underneath that Table View tab. If you switch to Web View, it will show you that web page in that little preview pane as well. If Excel picks up more than one table, you will have the additional tables listed underneath the URL, but we've only got one in this instance. Now, one thing you might notice here is that there seems to be some data that I didn't see before, like this column here where it says team hasn't moved. So this is, I guess, just an update on the status of that particular team. That's not actually listed on the web page that we pulled the data from. But if I scroll across, you'll see that the rest of the information is basically what I'm looking for. Now, if you were getting data from a very large, very long page, it may only show you part of it in the preview. But in this case, if I scroll across, it looks like it's got pretty much all of the information that I'm interested in and some additional things that maybe I'm not so interested in. So all I need to do is click on the load button at the bottom. And you can see now that that's been loaded into my Excel worksheet. Now again, it may take a moment or two to do that, but when it's finished, you can see that the data loaded and there are some very important aspects of what you can see. One of them is that it's loaded into a table. So once again, if you haven't dealt with tables before, you may need to come back to this. And it's also created a query. If you look over on the right-hand side, you'll see in the Queries and Connections pane, we have a little query pane there. And also, if you cast your eyes up to the top of the ribbon, you can see a Table Tools set of tabs, the Design tab, and also Query Tools there as well with a Query tab. And we're going to look at that in just a moment. But over on the right, it's also created a workbook query. And this query is one that I can rerun at any time in order to get updated results. So I could right-click and select Refresh. Now, generally speaking, Premier League matches happen at the weekend, occasionally during the week, but there wouldn't really be much point to doing a regular update of this query. But I might want to update it, say, once a week, or I might want to go in and update it whenever I want to look at the table. Fundamentally, this facility has the ability to update this for me either automatically or subject to manual operation by me. Now, apart from what you can see here in front of you, again, if you cast your eyes over to the right-hand side to the Queries and Connections pane, you can see we have our query listed here, Table 0. If I right-click and go to Properties, you'll see that familiar Query Properties dialog box with its three tabs at the top, Usage, Definition, and Used In. And what I'm going to do on this occasion is not to set up an automatic refresh, but I'm going to say refresh data when opening the file. So that means that every time I open this workbook, I will try and do a refresh. And of course, I've always got the option of doing a manual refresh anyway. And one other interesting checkbox here is one that's immediately below that one. If you're processing a large amount of source data and as part of the transform and combine operations you are only finishing up with a small part of that data, you can actually tell Excel that each time it saves the workbook, it can remove the external data. It doesn't need to include those in the workbook. And then the next time you load it, you can reload the updated external data and you'll still finish up with everything being processed in the way that you want. That can drastically reduce the size of your saved workbooks. On this occasion, though, the amount of data here is not that great, so we have no need to do that, but it is very useful if you are dealing with large amounts of data. So that's connection properties. That's my connect or get stage of get and transform. The next thing I'm going to do is transform this data. And in particular, I want to get rid of some of the data in that table that I don't need and also fix one or two potential problems in the rest of it. So as I pointed out just now, the results of that query are in a table and we have the Table Tools Design tab option there if I wanted to format the table or perform other things on it, such as removing the banding of the rows, etc. But if I click on Query and then Edit, I can go into the Query Editor, which allows me to basically change what is produced by the query. Now there are a number of things that I can do, and one of them is to remove unwanted columns. So let me select that first column, and I can either right click and choose remove, or if you look up on the home ribbon, we have a remove columns option. And I'm also going to remove the final column just here as well. I'm not so interested in that. So if I were to save this query as it is now and run it again next week, that series of steps would be carried out for me automatically because the applied steps are all being stored over here with the query. If you look over on the right hand side, you can see underneath applied steps, it's showing me that I just removed columns. So that's all being saved within this query. So essentially, as I perform each step, if I change my mind about that, I can click on the delete, the little cross just here, and that will undo those changes. And you'll see that if I do that, those columns are back again. I'm going to remove those columns once again. If you want to remove multiple columns at the same time, just click to highlight the first one, hold down the Control key, and click to highlight the second one, and then just remove those columns. Another typical problem is that I may have something in a column that I don't want, but I may not want to remove the entire column. I might just want to remove something from it. So for instance here, I don't particularly want the expression team hasn't moved in that first column. So if I select the column, one of the options I have on the home ribbon is replace values. And that brings up the replace values dialog, and I can say what I want to replace. So in this case, it's the expression team hasn't moved, and I'm going to replace it with a space or nothing in this case. And you can see that's applied that to that first column. Now another thing I can do here is change the sort order, for example. Now there's a sort group here with ascending and descending options. If I select the position column, I could do a descending sort to sort those teams, or an ascending sort. Now one other thing to be aware of when you're dealing with data in the Power Query Editor is that Excel 2019 will assign a data type to each of your columns, and you can see at the top here, most of the time it picks up the correct data type. So where we have team, you can see with this little icon, Excel has picked up that that is text. For these other columns, you can see that it's picked up that they're numerical values in those columns, which as I look across, I can see that's all pretty much correct. However, occasionally Excel will detect the wrong data type, so it's very important that you go through and check to make sure that the data types are all accurate. And if they're not, you can just go up to the Transform ribbon and you can select the correct data type from the drop-down. There are so many different changes or ways that you can transform your data in the Power Query Editor, and I'll leave that for you to experiment with another time. Now, when I've finished making any other changes I want to make and click on Close and Load, I will have my updated transformed data. So that was an example of Get and Transform. One of two things to emphasize there, that is, of course, the editing we've done doesn't change the source data in any way. It only affects the transformation that is performed on the source data as part of this workbook query. And you can actually perform some incredibly complex transformations and combinations, etc. And there is even a purpose-built language called M that is used by the query editor that you can use yourself to do even more sophisticated transformations if you wanted to. So that's it for this section. We're coming up now to exercise 5, and I'm going to give you an exercise a bit like this one, so please join me for that.